present here and now. And in the awareness of God's presence here now, let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence, feeling your love move through us, feeling your peace overwhelm us, feeling your joy arise within us. With this blessing, we pass this on into this moment, unconditionally. We create our space of grace right now. And for those in our experience who seem to have a need for the awareness of your love and your peace and your joy, we hold them in consciousness and we see them blessed, lifted, transformed in this moment. And for this opportunity to be ministers of your word, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. Well, we are the creators. You know that, right? You know that, right? Doesn't sound like many of you know that. We are the creators, right? Yes. Do I hear an amen? Okay, all right. So, last week we talked about creating the space of grace. How many of you did a little work with that this week? Practice it a little bit? What was your experience? Anything you'd like to share? Nella, could you bring me a glass of water, please? Could you bring me a glass of water, please? Yes, thank you. Chris. To remember. Ah, cool. Thank you. You've been carrying those just for this moment, right? Okay. Anyone else? Oh, thank you very much. It's nice to have a platform assistant. All right. Is it going to stand? It is going to stand. All right. Well, we have that skill if we choose to practice it. We have the ability to create this space of grace, as I talked about last week. And in creating the space of grace, we are creating a moment, and it may only be a moment, but we are creating a moment in which we are experiencing the presence of the divine, the glory of God right here, right now. I think I am going to use this. You know, they say don't have anything in your mouth when you're speaking. We'll see. I think you will appreciate this more than if I don't use this. But I have noticed that I don't know what's in these cough drops, but I find that after I'm getting about 3/4 of the way through, it's as if somebody slipped in a little bit of marijuana. It's not that. I know it's not. But there's some kind of high that comes as a result of this. What's the brand? What? Melaleuca. It's only available through local representatives. And turns out they're out of Montana, so we know that it's not. It could be menthol, yeah. All right. So the space of grace is something that we can create for the moment. But when we realize that that is something that we can do, what we're doing is we're creating an environment of life, an environment of living that is extraordinary. It doesn't have to be extraordinary in the traditional sense of the word. It can be very ordinary if we choose to make it so. But we find that this space of grace is something that will transform or does transform our particular moment. When we have that realization that we have that ability, we can also extend that to realize that we can create that which we want. That which we want. Maybe not in the things per se. I mean, if we go back to our daily word today. Spiritual prosperity appears in many ways, only some of which are things. I am blessed by answered prayers, loving relationships, and the contentment of a job well done. I am blessed by an experience where I am without fear. I am blessed with an experience that is fulfilling. Okay? That is spiritual prosperity. An experience that is fulfilling. And when we realize that we can create that, what else is there? We create the space of grace. We create that fulfilling life experience. And from there, the material seems to not have such a great importance. We could be running on fumes in our bank account, and nonetheless, we can have a fulfilling life. And so, as we learn that we are the creators of that, we are empowered. We are empowered from that moment on, as long as we remember that we are able to do that. I'm reading a book now called Biocentrism. Biocentrism is a book about the reversal of the perspective that physicists presently take on the nature of the universe. We know that there is the theory of relativity, which deals with very large distances, very large masses, gravitation, acceleration. We know about we have heard of, at least, quantum theory. Quantum theory deals with the very small, the very, very, very small. And it turns out that those two very well-tested theories don't come together. When they try to apply relativity theory to the very small, they find that they wind up with inconsistencies and undefinables. They find that the quantum theory does not apply too well, to some extent, but not too well, to those visible things, those large things that we can see in a microscope. So when we see these two theories of the nature of the universe that are irreconcilable, we have to wonder, is there another perspective? Is there another way to look at this? And Robert Lanza, who is the author of this book, says, yes, there is. There is, because one of the important aspects of quantum theory is the importance or the acknowledgement that consciousness, in and of itself, consciousness is that which causes the quantum to become real, the quantum to take on characteristics. Now, there are some New Thought teachers that go on and say that this is our creative process. Well, yeah, but it's not a creative process that we can mentally control. But the perspective that he takes is that when you consider that consciousness came first and the universe came second, then these paradoxes that quantum theory offers start to resolve themselves. Well, I'm in the process of reading this book. Frankly, it's above my pay grade intellectually. But I'm slogging through it. And what I am gathering from it is that when we start to look at the nature of the universe as consciousness first, then we begin to realize that, wait a minute, consciousness first. Consciousness is the preamble to creation. And the preamble to creation is something that we are involved in on an ongoing basis, aren't we? That is, we have the activity of our little sliver of consciousness, our personal consciousness, if you will, is involved in this creative process. It's what allows us to create a space of grace. It is also what allows us to be inspired by an idea, to bring forth that idea with intentions and clothe that set of intentions and idea with some assumptions, and then give our attention to that to come up with whatever it is that we want to create. Okay? So, this process of being creative beings is something that we try to avoid. Why do we try to avoid that, do you think? Why do you think that we don't want to accept that we are fully capable creative beings? Chris?
Because it's a huge responsibility. Response-ability. It is a huge thing that we accept when we acknowledge that, yes, we are creative beings. And I don't know about you, but I've got other things to do, right? I don't want to take on that responsibility. But that responsibility is exactly what we are. We are creative beings. We are an element. We are an expression. We are the momentary face of the divine in this moment when we choose. Now, what causes us not to choose is that aspect of consciousness which declares that we are separate and apart from God and from each other. But we are truly a present, momentary expression of the divine if we allow ourselves to be. So, Robert Lanza spoke of a situation in high school. He lived in a suburb of Boston, and he was able to get a professor at Harvard to advise him on his high school science project. And so Stephen Kufel was the professor. He had helped Robert Lanza, and so when Robert Lanza graduated from high school, you know, he had a summer off. He was going to go to college, but he had a summer off, and so he put out his application at the local McDonald's and the Dunkin' Donuts and, you know, the places where high school students apply for a summer job. But he said, you know, I'd like to work for a Nobel laureate. Okay, here's a high school graduate, out of school in the summertime. What do I want to do? Do I want to cashier at Dunkin' Donuts, or do I want to work for a Nobel laureate? He decided, okay, I live very close to Boston here. I'm going to hop on the train. I'm going to go in, and I'm going to ask around Harvard. I know that James Watson, who was a partner of Crick in the development of the scheme of the DNA, he thought that he was on faculty, so he went to Dr. Watson's department, and turns out that Watson had changed employment. He had gone to work at Cornell or some other university away from Harvard. And so he said, well, who else is here? I know that there is a doctor, I think it was a Dr. Kalb. So I'm going to go over to Dr. Kalb's office, he thought. And so he went over to Dr. Kalb's office, and Dr. Kalb was out sick that day. Receptionist said, can I leave a message? He said, no, I'm here in Boston just this afternoon, and I need to get back home. And so on the train, he said, "No, wait a minute. Boston has a bunch of universities. What other universities are nearby?" It turns out MIT was nearby. So he got off the train near MIT and went to the main building, the dome, the columns, the big Greek Orthodox Greek architecture building. And he asked the receptionist there, he says, "Are there any Nobel laureates that work here?" And the receptionist said, "Well, yes, there are. There's a Kohana, and there is a Dr. Luria." And he said, "Well, who is the most famous?" Well, Dr. Luria is. He's the head of the Cancer Research Center. So he went over to the Cancer Research Center, and he went to the office of the director, and he said to the receptionist, "Is Dr. Luria in?" And she said, "Well, no, but he'll be back in an hour. He's in a meeting right now, so he'll be back in an hour." So he said, "Okay, I'll come back." So he came back in an hour, and the receptionist said, "Well, now he doesn't have much time, but you can go on in." He says, "I can." So he went, knocked on the door, and out of the office came a, "Come in." So he opened the door, and there was Dr. Luria having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at his desk. And the thought that went through his mind is, this is what Nobel laureates eat? So Luria said, "So who are you?" He says, "Well, I'm Robert Lanza." He says, "Who sent you?" And he says, "No one." He says, "You're in off the street?" "Well, yeah." He says, "Well, what can I do for you?" He said, "Well, I'd like to have a job. I can learn fast. I'll be willing to do anything." And so Luria was taken by the brashness of this young man. And he says, "Well, who else have you worked for? What else have you done?" And at this point, Robert Lanza said, "Well, I worked with Stephen Kufel, Professor Kufel, over at Harvard on my high school science project." And Luria said, "Well, I know Stephen. He's a good man. Tell you what, I'll get you a job. Come back tomorrow." So he came back tomorrow, next day, and Luria met him on campus, took him into the placement office, and told the person there, said, "Get this man a job, whatever he wants to do." Well, it turns out that he was given a job with a Dr. Hines. Now, Dr. Hines was involved in cancer research, as it was in that department. And while he was there, Robert Lanza was involved in the research that showed a particular protein being added to a cancer-like cell, causing the cancer-like cell to revert to its standard operation. And this was a piece of research that Dr. Luria, when he heard about it, he said, "Lanza, that's the best news I've heard all week." Turns out that research that he was working on, and there were several people working on, but that research that he was working on was later published in the journal Cell, which is a significant medical journey. Now think about this. High school student. Applications to the typical employers for high school students. But he decided that he wanted to work for a Nobel laureate. And so he stepped out. He did what was necessary. He put the feet on the street. He made the active effort to fulfill his dream. Now, we talked about Michael Singer's approach, where Michael Singer would respond to whatever was put in front of him and do the best that he could. And that was Michael Singer's success, key to success in growing to be a CEO of a billion-dollar company. Well, Lanza did one thing further. What did he do? What did he do? Come on. What did he do? He asked, right? He asked. In Matthew 7, verses 1 through 6, Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own? Or why can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you. First of all, do not judge. What is the result of creating a space of grace? The result of creating a space of grace is that judgment is not even part of your modus operandi, okay? Judgment becomes a non-issue when you create the space of grace. Create the space of grace, and do not give what is holy to dogs. What would be giving what is holy to dogs? Giving what is holy to dogs would be taking your creative process, your creative power, and putting it to the service of what? The ego. If you take your creative power and put it to the service of the ego, what's going to be the result? It's going to be something like, oh, look at me. Look what I did. Isn't that great? Aren't I wonderful? Doesn't that prove that I'm superior to you? Right? That's taking the pearls and throwing them before swine. Do not waste your creative process on fulfilling or aggrandizing the ego, because that actually has a detrimental effect on your own growth. It causes you to realize a falsehood. That falsehood being that, aren't I great? Instead, use the creative process to be in the service of the divine, to love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. As you allow that to be in the service of loving God and loving all, then what you're doing is you are multiplying God in this moment. You are leveraging your power to be a creative expression of God by being God in this moment, by being the creator in this moment. Allowing yourself to be the creator in this moment will have the effect of your realizing, even at a deeper level, the nature of who you are. And the nature of who you are is the expression of the divine in this moment. Ask, and it will be given to you. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened for you. For everyone who asks receives, and everyone who searches finds. And for everyone who knocks, the door will be open. Is there anyone among you who, if a child asks for bread, will give a stone? Or if the child asks for a fish, will give a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to you who ask him? Jesus is speaking to an audience that is very accustomed to hearing about God out there. So Jesus is not able to use the phrase, how much more will divine consciousness give to you? But rather, that is what he is speaking about. He's talking about the consciousness which we can label as God, that overall consciousness. He's saying that this is going to reward you because you are serving the divine, not because you're serving the ego, but you're serving the divine. And you will be rewarded with fulfillment, with peace, with spiritual gifts, prosperity, in the sense of that which is going to fulfill your experience. Do you see that? We take this very traditional, very I use it often, this passage, and we look at it a little bit different way. That if we come at it from the perspective that we are an expression of the universal consciousness right here and now, we are the creative beings that we were meant to be. We can be that. We can be that. We can be that if we choose. So when we look at this creative process as taking an idea and putting it into form, all within divine mind, starting with what Fillmore regarded as substance, that is that realm of creative energy, creative food, bring it through our thoughts into this expression manifestation. We're using the inspiration, we're using intention, we're using the assumptions, and we're using the attention. The inspiration is what allows us to say, oh, wow, wouldn't that be something? Yeah, what about that? So whatever that is, if that is brought into the service of the divine instead of into the service of the ego, if that's brought in to multiply and amplify, love God with all your heart and love your neighbors as yourself, then your intention empowers that inspiration. Do you see that? So with your intention empowering your inspiration, then we come to the assumptions. Now, Robert Lanza, what did he think? What was his assumption? His assumption was, I'm going to go to Boston for the afternoon and I'm going to get a job for a Nobel laureate. How brash is that? He didn't assume that his only job that he could get was going to be with Dunkin' Donuts. Instead, he said, I want to work for a Nobel laureate. I'm going to do what's necessary. And in so doing, he opened up the possibilities. You see, our assumptions typically reduce the possibilities, right? Oh, I can't do that. I mean, I don't have any, I'm not even a college student yet. Furthermore, I'm not a college student here. I don't have any credentials. I don't have anything that I could bring to the party. He didn't allow those negative or constricting assumptions to limit what he was able to do. And once he then let his assumptions be broad and wide, then he gave his attention to it. And he gave his attention to it by what? By going there, by asking, by doing what was necessary to see what doors were open, what possibilities indeed were available to him in that afternoon. So this creative process is something that we can all make use of. But the thing that is going to shut it down is what? Fear. Fear is going to shut it down. And so we have the opportunity, when we are creating this space of grace, what happens? When we create the space of grace, what we're doing is we are eliminating fear. We're eliminating judgment. We're eliminating all of those things that the ego might use to restrict us so that it can prove that we are not part of God, that we're separate from each and every other. You see it? So this creative process is something that we have available to us to utilize to the fulfillment of our lives. It's there. It works. All we have to do is we have to let go of all of the stuff that the ego puts in front of us. It's up to us. It is our choice. What do we choose? We'll have our meditation. As we settle into this moment, as we allow this moment to be clear and open, we allow our thoughts to move through our mind without attachment.
we take just a moment to acknowledge that our minds are replete with thoughts, random, various. But we don't have to give them any attention. We can allow our observer to just note them and let them go. Notice how they are disempowered when we don't attend to them. So we notice them and let them go. We breathe in. We breathe out. We notice them and we let them go. Breathing in, breathing out, giving thanks for the breath. Giving thanks for this moment, for this place in consciousness where we are right now. We give thanks. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. And for this opportunity to practice the presence, we give thanks. As we come back into this time and space, let us come back with Alleluia.